Welcome back, everyone. This video is going to continue our discussion of John Locke's attack against innate ideas. But this time, we're going to focus on those dispositional accounts of innate ideas. And so we'll look at reason-based accounts of innate ideas. So what are these accounts and what's Locke's criticisms? And then we'll look at understanding-based accounts of innate ideas. So what these theories are and what Locke's criticisms are. All right, so remember, there's a suggestion that we sort of talked about at the end of the last video that says we should think of innate principles not as knowledge that we sort of currently have maybe at birth that we're consciously thinking of, but rather as a sort of disposition, a power that's included in our nature to become conscious of or to come to know these things. So there's an example of fragility as a disposition. So fragility, the idea is a glass can be fragile. What that means is that under the right conditions, there's a certain tendency for the glass to break. So again, it doesn't mean that the glass is going to break right now. Rather, it means that when I put it in a certain condition, such as smashing against the wall, it would break. So on this kind of view, when we think of this innate knowledge or these innate ideas as dispositions, the claim is that we are constructed by God or evolution so that under the right conditions, we would become conscious of or come to know these principles. And so this knowledge is sort of, it's already written there, but it needs to sort of be activated, so to speak. So the fact that a child does not currently know a principle does not show that that principle isn't sort of innate. The child might still have that disposition as part of their nature when they're sort of born, even if that disposition hasn't been activated yet. There's that analogy with fragility. Even though the glass hasn't been broken yet, it still currently has the disposition to break. So the child might not know the thing when they're born, but they still currently, at that time, they still have the disposition to have that knowledge. However, these accounts still need to sort of tell us, well, what are the conditions under which this sort of innate knowledge would be activated? Well, one view appeals to reason. It says there's innate knowledge in us because there are various principles that we are capable of knowing to be true as soon as we have developed our faculty of reason. So the idea is when you put us in a condition where we have the ability to reason, we will then come to know these principles. So development of that faculty is what activates this knowledge that we sort of have sort of dispositionally. On this view, children, they have the disposition to know this because as soon as we give them the ability to reason, they will then recognize these truths and know that they are true. The fact that they don't know it right now doesn't mean that they don't have that principle, they don't have that information. They just don't have the reason that would allow them to activate that information. All right, so Locke, though, challenges his account, and he says, look, this view of innate principles fails to distinguish between our knowledge of the axioms of logic and mathematics and our knowledge of theorems that we derive via proofs of those axioms. So think, look, the axioms of mathematics are the sort of foundations, the things we sort of assume in mathematics. And then when you take those assumptions, you might then go through proofs and arguments to come to conclusions to know new things about mathematics. But the worry is that on this view, all I need is my reason in order to derive those things. So once I have reason, I can know not just the axioms, but I can also use my reason to derive these other theorems to go through these proofs. And that would mean that all of mathematics is innate. It is kind of strange to think that our knowledge of something like Goldbach's conjecture, which no one has proven to be true or to be false yet, to claim that we all innately have that knowledge seems a little bit strange. Moreover, Locke says reason can't discover any innate principles, since reason isn't a faculty for giving us initial truths. Rather, reason is a way of moving from earlier truths to later truths, to move from premises to conclusions. But reason can't give us knowledge of the premises, since reason is the process by which we move from the premises to the conclusion. So we need some other explanation for how we can know those premises. And so the idea is reason can't give innate knowledge. An alternative account appeals not to reason but to understanding. So the idea here is that there's innate knowledge because there are various principles that we know to be true upon those principles first being proposed to us and first being understood by our mind. So the idea here is, look, the reason that children don't have knowledge of these innate principles is because they just don't have the ability to understand those principles. And so they can't even have the thought in their mind. But as soon as they gain the ability to have that thought, they will then immediately recognize it as true. And so in order to activate this knowledge, we just need to put them in the condition where they actually understand the principle that's being proposed to them. Now, Locke also thinks that this fails for a number of reasons. He says, if this was the view, it would prove too much. Since specific propositions, such as 1 + 2 = 3, sweetness is not bitterness, a square is not a circle, or white is not black, all those claims, all those truths would be innate on this account, because as soon as these are proposed to us and we understand what they say, we thereby assent to them. We thereby know that they are true. But it doesn't seem like the claim that white is not black or that red is not green could be innately imprinted on our minds. Partly because if a truth or knowledge such as white is not black is innate, then it seems like the ideas involved in understanding that claim would also have to be innate. So if you don't have the ideas of white and black, red and green, it's not clear that there's any sense in which you could know that red is not green. And so if white is not black, red is not green, if those are part of your innate knowledge, then it looks like the ideas of red, green, white, and black also have to be innate. But it seems strange to think that all of the colors, the ideas of all colors, are innate in our mind. That would seem to be bad. Moreover, he says that we assent to them upon first understanding isn't a sign that this knowledge is innate. Rather, it's just a sign that these propositions are self-evident, that these claims, once we understand them, they wear their evidence on their sleeve. So they are evidence for their own truth. It doesn't show that those truths are thereby innate in our minds. All right, there is a response here. One response is that, look, these specific propositions are not innate. However, the reason we assent to them when we first consider them is because we have innate knowledge of more general and abstract principles. So, on this view, the claim, red is not green, that principle is not innate in us. But the claim is the reason we assent to this claim as soon as we understand it is because we have innate knowledge of more general principles from which we derive the conclusion that red is not green. So we have innate knowledge of this general claim that if A and B, so if two things have different features, then A is not identical to B. And once we get the ideas of red and green, we see that they have different features, and we then apply our innate knowledge of this general sort of consideration to conclude that red is not green. So we had to acquire the knowledge that red is not green, but we were able to acquire it immediately once it was proposed to us because we had this innate knowledge of the more general principle. Locke's objection, though, he says, these and the like less general propositions are certainly known and firmly assented to by those who are utterly ignorant of those more general maxims, and so being earlier in their mind than those, as they are called, first principles, cannot owe to them the assent with which they are received at first hearing. So Locke is saying here that this view, basically, it gets the order of explanation wrong. When we look at how knowledge develops, people first gain knowledge of the specific propositions, and then red is not green, black is not white, 2 is not 3. We first gain the knowledge of those specific things, and then we start to recognize a pattern, and then realize, well, in general, if two things have different features, then they are not identical to one another. All right, so if we gain knowledge of the specific claims before we gain knowledge of the more abstract principles, that suggests that our knowledge of the specific claims cannot sort of rely on knowledge of these general principles, some sort of innate knowledge of those general principles. But now at this point, someone might say, well, hold on. Maybe we have an implicit innate knowledge of these more general principles. And it's this implicit knowledge that allows us to immediately assent to the specific claims, such as red is not green. So think of it this way. The idea is we first have implicit knowledge of the general principles. And then we get explicit knowledge of the specific principles, which we then use to raise our implicit knowledge of the general principles to consciousness and thereby make that explicit. Locke, though, objects to this. He says, what does it actually mean to say that you have implicit knowledge of these principles rather than explicit knowledge? Locke thinks the only possible interpretation is that to be implicitly known just means the mind is capable of understanding and assenting firmly to such propositions. But if that's what it means to implicitly know something, to say that you are capable of knowing it, it would make all of mathematics, yet again, pieces of innate knowledge. In fact, it would make anything that we ever know innate, since if we end up knowing it, we clearly had the capacity to know it. So, if someone wants to defend some sort of innate knowledge, they need to give an interpretation of what implicit knowledge is that is different than just the capability of understanding and assenting to it. Now, one idea here might be, look, maybe these general principles, maybe the way we reason sort of follows these principles without us sort of consciously thinking about them. And so we use that in making our inferences. So imagine I tell my daughter, if we go to Target, then you can get a toy, okay? And then later on, let's say I say, oh, hey, look, we got to go to Target. And then my daughter says, oh, so that means we're going to get a toy. It looks like my daughter is using modus ponens. So if A, then B, A, therefore B. So she comes to the conclusion that she's going to get a toy by using modus ponens, by following that rule that says if you have the premise if A, then B, and you have the premise A, you can conclude B. She doesn't know what modus ponens is. She can't even understand that abstract idea, but her reasoning is still sort of implicitly following that rule. And so someone might say the implicit knowledge here isn't just your capability of understanding the claim. Rather, it's your capability of following the rule that the claim says. And then explicit knowledge is when you bring that rule that you're already following to consciousness. All right, so that's one attempt to maybe try to spell this out. So that's it for this video. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.